Chapter 1 of The Devil in Iron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Chenevert. The Devil in Iron by Robert E. Howard. Was first published in Weird Tales, August 1934. Chapter 1. The fisherman loosened his knife in its scabbard. The gesture was instinctive, for what he feared was nothing a knife could slay, not even the saw-edged crescent blade of the Yuetshi that could disembowel a man with an upward stroke. Neither man nor beast threatened him in the solitude which brooded over the castellated isle of Xapur. He had climbed the cliffs, passed through the jungle that bordered them, and now stood surrounded by evidences of a vanished state. Broken columns glimmered among the trees. The staggering lines of crumbling walls meandered off into the shadows, and under his feet were broad paves, cracked and bowed by roots growing beneath. The fisherman was typical of his race, that strange people whose origin is lost in the gray dawn of the past, and who have dwelt in their rude fishing huts along the southern shore of the Sea of Vilayet since time immemorial. He was broadly built, with long apish arms and a mighty chest, but with lean loins and thin bandy legs. His face was broad, his forehead low and retreating, his hair thick and tangled. A belt for a knife and a rag for a loincloth were all he wore in the way of clothing. That he was where he was proved that he was less dully incurious than most of his people. Men seldom visited Xapur. It was uninhabited, all but forgotten, merely one among the myriad isles which dotted the great inland sea. Men called it Xapur the Fortified, because of its ruins, remnants of some prehistoric kingdom, lost and forgotten before the conquering Hyborians had ridden southward. No one knew who reared these stones, though dim legends lingered among the Yuetshi which half intelligibly suggested a connection of immeasurable antiquity between the fishers and the unknown island kingdom. But it had been 1,000 years since any Yuetshi had understood the import of these tales. They repeated them now as a meaningless formula, a gibberish framed by their lips by custom. No Yuetshi had come to Xapur for a century. The adjacent coast of the mainland was uninhabited, a reedy marsh given over to the grim beasts that haunted it. The fisher's village lay some distance to the south on the mainland. A storm had blown his frail fishing craft far from his accustomed haunts, and wrecked it in a night of flaring lightning and roaring waters on the towering cliffs of the isle. Now in the dawn the sky shone blue and clear. The rising sun made jewels of the dripping leaves. He had climbed the cliffs to which he had clung through the night because, in the midst of the storm, he had seen an appalling lance of lightning fork out of the black heavens, and the concussion of its stroke, which had shaken the whole island, had been accompanied by a cataclysmic crash that he doubted could have resulted from a riven tree. A dull curiosity had caused him to investigate, and now he had found what he sought, and an animal-like uneasiness possessed him, a sense of lurking peril. Among the trees reared a broken, dome-like structure, built of gigantic blocks of the peculiar iron-like green stone found only on the islands of Vilayet. It seemed incredible that human hands could have shaped and placed them, and certainly it was beyond human power to have overthrown the structure they formed. But the thunderbolt had splintered the ton-heavy blocks like so much glass, reduced others to green dust, and ripped away the whole arch of the dome. The fisherman climbed over the debris and peered in, and what he saw brought a grunt from him. Within the ruined dome, surrounded by stone dust and bits of broken masonry, lay a man on the golden block. He was clad in a sort of skirt and a shagreen girdle. His black hair, which fell in a square mane to his massive shoulders, was confined about his temples by a narrow gold band. On his bare, muscular breast lay a curious dagger with a jeweled pommel, shagreen-bound hilt, and a broad crescent blade. It was much like the knife the fisherman wore at his hip, but it lacked the serrated edge and was made with infinitely greater skill. The fisherman lusted for the weapon. The man, of course, was dead, had been dead for many centuries. This dome was his tomb. The fisherman did not wonder by what art the ancients had preserved the body in such a vivid likeness of life, which kept the muscular limbs full and unshrunken, the dark flesh vital. The dull brain of the Yuetshi had room only for his desire for the knife with its delicate waving lines along the dully gleaming blade. Scrambling down into the dome, he lifted the weapon from the man's breast. And as he did so, a strange and terrible thing came to pass. The muscular dark hands knotted convulsively. The lids flared open, revealing great, dark magnetic eyes, whose stare struck the startled fisherman like a physical blow. He recoiled, dropping the jeweled dagger in his perturbation. The man on the dais heaved up to a sitting position, and the fisherman gaped at the full extent of his size thus revealed. His narrowed eyes held the Yuetshi, and in those slitted orbs he read neither friendliness nor gratitude. He saw only a fire as alien and hostile as that which burns in the eyes of a tiger. Suddenly the man rose and towered above him, menace in every aspect. There was no room in the fisherman's dull brain for fear, at least for such fear as might grip a man who has just seen the fundamental laws of nature defied. As the great hands fell to his shoulders, he drew his saw-edged knife and struck upward with the same motion. The blade splintered against the stranger's corded belly as against a steel column. And then the fisherman's thick neck broke like a rotten twig in the giant hands. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Devil in Iron by Robert E. Howard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. Jahangir Agha, Lord of Khawarizm and Keeper of the Coastal Border, scanned once more the ornate parchment scroll with its peacock seal, and laughed shortly and sardonically. "Well?" bluntly demanded his counselor, Ghaznavi. Jahangir shrugged his shoulders. He was a handsome man with the merciless pride of birth and accomplishment. "The king grows short of patience," said he. "In his own hand he complains bitterly of what he calls my failure to guard the frontier. By Tarim, if I cannot deal a blow to these robbers of the steppes, Khawarizm may own a new lord." Ghaznavi tugged his gray-shot beard in meditation. Yazdgurd, king of Turan, was the mightiest monarch in the world. In his palace, in the great port city of Xapur, was heaped the plunder of empires. His fleets of purple-sailed war galleys had made Vilayet and Hyrkanian Lake. The dark-skinned people of Zamora paid him tribute, as did the eastern province of Koth. The Shemites bowed to his rule as far west as Sushan. His armies ravaged the borders of Stygia in the south and the snowy lands of the Hyperboreans in the north. His riders bore torch and sword westward into Brythumia and Ophir and Corinthia, even to the borders of Nemedia. His gilt-helmeted swordmen had trampled hosts under their horses' hoofs, and walled cities went up in flames at his command. In the glutted slave markets of Agrapur, Sultanapur, Khawarizm, Xapur, and Khorusan, women were sold for 3 small silver coins. Blonde Brythunians, tawny Stygians, dark-haired Samorians, ebon Cushites, olive-skinned Shemites. Yet, while his swift horsemen overthrew armies far from his frontiers, at his very borders an audacious foe plucked his beard with a red, dripping, and smoke-stained hand. On the broad steppes between the Sea of Vilayet and the borders of the easternmost Hyborian kingdoms, a new race had sprung up in the past half-century, formed originally of fleeing criminals, broken men, escaped slaves, and deserting soldiers. They were men of many crimes and countries, some born on the steppes, some fleeing from the kingdoms in the west. They were called Kozak, which means wastrel. Dwelling on the wild open steppes, owning no law but their own peculiar code, they had become a people capable of defying the Grand Monarch. Ceaselessly they raided the Turanian frontier, retiring in the steppes when defeated. With the pirates of Vilayet, men of much the same breed, they harried the coast, preying off the merchant ships which plied between the Hyrkanian ports. "How am I to crush these wolves?" demanded Jehungir. "If I follow them into the steppes, I run the risk either of being cut off and destroyed, or having them elude me entirely and burn the city in my absence. Of late they have been more daring than ever." "That is because of the new chief who has risen among them," answered Ghaznavi. "You know whom I mean." "Aye," replied Jehungir feelingly. "It is that devil Conan. He is even wilder than the Kozaks, yet he is crafty as a mountain lion." "It is more through wild animal instinct than through intelligence," answered Ghaznavi. "The other Kozaks are at least descendants of civilized men. He is a barbarian, but to dispose of him would be to deal them a crippling blow." "But how?" demanded Jehungir. "He has repeatedly cut his way out of spots that seemed certain death for him, and by instinct or cunning he has avoided or escaped every trap set for him. For every beast and for every man there is a trap he will not escape," quoth Ghaznavi. "When we have parleyed with the Kozaks for the ransom of captives, I have observed this man Conan. He has a keen relish for women and strong drink. Have your captive Octavia fetched here." Jehungir clapped his hands, and an impassive Kushite eunuch, an image of shining ebony in silken pantaloons, bowed before him and went to do his bidding. Presently he returned, leading by the wrist a tall, handsome girl, whose yellow hair, clear eyes, and fair skin identified her as a pure-blooded member of her race. Her scanty silk tunic, girded at the waist, displayed the marvelous contours of her magnificent figure. Her fine eyes flashed with resentment, and her red lips were sulky, but submission had been taught her during her captivity. She stood with hanging head before her master, until he motioned her to a seat on the divan beside him. Then he looked inquiringly at Ghaznavi. "We must lure Conan away from the Kozaks," said the counselor abruptly. "Their war camp is at present pitched somewhere on the lower reaches of the Zaporoska River, which, as you well know, is a wilderness of reeds, a swampy jungle in which our last expedition was cut to pieces by those masterless devils. I am not likely to forget that, said Jehungir wryly. There is an uninhabited island near the mainland, said Ghaznavi, known as Xapur the Fortified, because of some ancient ruins upon it. There is a peculiarity about it which makes it perfect for our purpose. It has no shoreline, but rises sheer out of the sea in cliffs 150 feet tall. Not even an ape could negotiate them. The only place where a man can go up or down is a narrow path on the western side that has the appearance of a worn stair carved into the solid rock of the cliffs. If we could trap Conan on that island alone, we could hunt him down at our leisure with bows as men hunt a lion. As well wish for the moon, said Jehungir impatiently. Shall we send him a messenger bidding him climb the cliffs and wait our coming? In effect, yes. Seeing Jehungir's look of amazement, Ghaznavi continued. We will ask for a parley with the Cossacks in regard to prisoners at the edge of the steppes by Fort Gori. As usual, we will go with a force and encamp outside the castle. They will come with an equal force, and the parley will go forward with the usual distrust and suspicion. But this time we will take with us, as if by casual chance, your beautiful captive. Octavia changed color and listened with intensified interest as the counselor nodded toward her. She will use all her wiles to attract Conan's attention. That should not be difficult. To that wild reaver she should appear a dazzling vision of loveliness. Her vitality and substantial figure should appeal to him more vividly than would one of the doll-like beauties of your seraglio. Octavia sprang up, her white fists clenched, her eyes blazing, and her figure quivering with outraged anger. You would force me to play the trollop with this barbarian? She exclaimed. I will not. I am no market block slut to smirk and ogle at a steppes robber. I am the daughter of a Nemedian lord. You were of the Nemedian nobility before my riders carried you off, returned Jehungir cynically. Now you are merely a slave who will do as she is bid. I will not, she raged. On the contrary, rejoined Jehungir with studied cruelty, you will. I like Ghaznavi's plan. Continue, prince among counselors. Conan will probably wish to buy her. You will refuse to sell her, of course, or to exchange her for Hyrcanian prisoners. He may then try to steal her, or take her by force, though I do not think even he would break the parley truce. Anyway, we must be prepared for whatever he might attempt. Then, shortly after the parley, before he has time to forget all about her, we will send a messenger to him under a flag of truce, accusing him of stealing the girl and demanding her return. He may kill the messenger, but at least he will think that she has escaped. Then we will send a spy, a Yuetshi fisherman will do, to the Cossack camp, who will tell Conan that Octavia is hiding on Xapur. If I know my man, he will go straight to that place. But we do not know that he will go alone, Jehungir argued. Does a man take a band of warriors with him when going to a rendezvous with a woman he desires? Retorted Ghaznavi. The chances are that he will go alone, but we will need to take care of the other alternative. We will not await him on the island where we might be trapped ourselves, but among the reeds of a marshy point which juts out to within 1,000 yards of Xapur. If he brings a large force, we'll beat a retreat and think up another plot. If he comes alone or with a small party, we will have him. Depend upon it, He will come, remembering your charming slave's smiles and meaning glances." "I will never descend to such shame." Octavia was wild with fury and humiliation. "I will die first." "You will not die, my rebellious beauty," said Jehungir, "but you will be subjected to a very painful and humiliating experience." He clapped his hands, and Octavia paled. This time it was not the Kushite who entered, but a Shemite, a heavily muscled man of medium height, with a short curled blue-black beard. "Here is work for you, Gilzan," said Jehungir. "Take this fool and play with her a while, yet be careful not to spoil her beauty." With an inarticulate grunt, the Shemite seized Octavia's wrist, and at the grasp of his iron fingers all the defiance went out of her. With a piteous cry, she tore away and threw herself on her knees before her implacable master, sobbing incoherently for mercy. Jehungir dismissed the disappointed torturer with a gesture, and said to Ghaznavi, "If your plan succeeds, I will fill your lap with gold." End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Devil in Iron by Robert E. Howard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3. In the darkness before dawn, an unaccustomed sound disturbed the solitude that slumbered over the reedy marshes and the misty waters of the coast. It was not a drowsy waterfowl, nor a waking beast. It was a human, who struggled through the thick reeds which were taller than a man's head. It was a woman, had there been anyone to see, tall and yellow-haired, her splendid limbs molded by her bedraggled tunic. Octavia had escaped in good earnest, every outraged fiber of her still tingling from her experience in a captivity that had become unendurable. Jehungir's mastery of her had been bad enough, but with deliberate fiendishness Jehungir had given her to a nobleman whose name was a byword for degeneracy even in Khwarazm. Octavia's resilient flesh crawled and quivered at her memories. Desperation had nerved her climb from Jelal Khan's castle on a rope made of strips from torn tapestries, and chance had led her to a picketed horse. She had ridden all night, and dawn found her with a foundered steed on the swampy shores of the sea. Quivering with the abhorrence of being dragged back to the revolting destiny planned for her by Jelal Khan, she plunged into the morass, seeking a hiding place from the pursuit she expected. When the reeds grew thinner around her, and the water rose about her thighs, she saw the dim loom of an island ahead of her. A broad span of water lay between, but she did not hesitate. She waded out until the low waves were lapping about her waist. Then she struck out strongly, swimming with a vigor that promised unusual endurance. As she neared the island, she saw that it rose sheer from the water in castle-like cliffs. She reached them at last, but found neither ledge to stand on below the water, nor to cling to above. She swam on, following the curve of the cliffs, the strain of her long flight beginning to weigh her limbs. Her hands fluttered along the sheer stone, and suddenly they found a depression. With a sobbing gasp of relief, she pulled herself out of the water and clung there, a dripping white goddess in the dim starlight. She had come upon what seemed to be steps carved in the cliff. Up them she went, flattening herself against the stone as she caught the faint clack of muffled oars. She strained her eyes and thought she made out a vague bulk moving toward the reedy point she had just quitted, but it was too far away for her to be sure in the darkness, and presently The faint sound ceased, and she continued her climb. If it were her pursuers, she knew of no better course than to hide on the island. She knew that most of the islands off that marshy coast were uninhabited. This might be a pirate's lair, but even pirates would be preferable to the beast she had escaped. A vagrant thought crossed her mind as she climbed, in which she mentally compared her former master with the Kozak chief with whom, by compulsion, she had shamelessly flirted in the pavilions of the camp of Fort Agori, where the Hyrkanian lords had parleyed with the warriors of the steppes. His burning gaze had frightened and humiliated her, but his cleanly elemental fierceness set him above Jalal Khan, a monster such as only an overly opulent civilization can produce. She scrambled up over the cliff edge and looked timidly at the dense shadows which confronted her. The trees grew close to the cliffs, presenting a solid mass of blackness. Something whirred above her head, and she cowered, even though realizing it was only a bat. She did not like the look of those ebony shadows, but she set her teeth and went toward them, trying not to think of snakes. Her bare feet made no sound in the spongy loam under the trees. Once among them, the darkness closed frighteningly about her. She had not taken a dozen steps when she was no longer able to look back and see the cliffs and the sea beyond. A few steps more, and she became hopelessly confused and lost her sense of direction. Through the tangled branches, not even a star peered. She groped and floundered on blindly, and then came to a sudden halt. Somewhere ahead there had been the rhythmical booming of a drum. It was not such a sound as she would have expected to hear in that time and place. Then she forgot it as she was aware of a presence near her. She could not see, but she knew that something was standing beside her in the darkness. With a stifled cry she shrank back, and as she did so, something that even in her panic she recognized as a human arm curved about her waist. She screamed and threw all her supple young strength into a wild lunge for freedom, but her captor caught her up like a child, crushing her frantic resistance with ease. The silence with which her frenzied pleas and protests were received added to her terror, as she felt herself being carried through the darkness toward the distant drum, which still pulsed and muttered. End of chapter 3.